I'm Melissa Carter, 32, and working as an event coordinator in Boston has taught me a lot about family drama. But nothing prepared me for my own. My younger brother Ryan and I have always been inseparable, so when he got engaged to Natalie Brooks, a woman from one of Boston's wealthiest families, I was thrilled to help plan their big day. Despite Natalie hiring Audrey Pierce, the most expensive wedding planner in the city, I was asked to assist with small details. Then came the call that changed everything. Ryan and I developed the kind of bond that only siblings who weather life storms together can understand. 4 years younger than me at 29 now, Ryan was always my responsibility when our parents worked overtime at their respective jobs. Mom as a nurse and Dad as a high school teacher. Those countless afternoons helping him with homework, bandaging skin knees, and defending him from neighborhood bullies created a connection that I thought nothing could break. Our middle-class upbringing wasn't filled with extravagances, but it was rich with values. Dad always emphasized education and hard work, which Ryan took to heart, while I found my passion in event planning. Eventually landing a respectable position at Harrington Events in downtown Boston, Ryan pursued computer science. It was at a charity gala benefiting Boston Children's Hospital 18 months ago that Ryan met Natalie Brooks. I wasn't there that night. The $500 ticket price was beyond my budget, but Ryan called me afterward, sounding almost breathless with excitement. "Mel, I met someone incredible tonight," he'd said, his voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before. Natalie, as I would soon learn, was the 26-year-old daughter of Harold and Diana Brooks. The Brooks name carried significant weight in Boston's social circles, with Harold's investment firm managing billions in assets and Diana sitting on the boards of half a dozen prestigious cultural institutions. Their family home in Beacon Hill was featured in architectural magazines, and their summer estate in Nantucket was the site of legendary parties attended by politicians and celebrities alike. When Ryan first mentioned Natalie's background, I'll admit I was skeptical. The wealth gap between our families was substantial, and I worried about his heart getting broken by someone who might see him as a temporary diversion. "Just be careful," I'd cautioned him. She was undeniably beautiful, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair, and the kind of polished appearance that speaks of regular spa treatments and designer wardrobes. What surprised me, however, was her apparent warmth. She asked thoughtful questions about my work, laughed genuinely at Ryan's terrible jokes, and seemed to genuinely adore my brother. By the end of the evening, I was cautiously optimistic. Their relationship progressed rapidly. Within 6 months, Natalie had practically moved into Ryan's apartment, though she maintained her own luxury condo in Back Bay. At 10 months, they were discussing marriage, and at the 1-year mark, Ryan called me in a panic, asking for help selecting an engagement ring that wouldn't embarrass him in front of Natalie's family. "She's not materialistic, Mel, but I want her parents to know I can provide for her," he explained as we browsed rings that cost more than my annual salary. I bit my tongue and supported him, eventually helping him choose a 3-carat diamond that required him to dip significantly into his savings. The smile on his face when Natalie said yes made me think it was worth it. The engagement dinner at the Brooks Beacon Hill home was my first real introduction to Natalie's parents. Her eyes quickly assessing my department store dress. "Natalie tells us you're in the event business?" "I'm an event coordinator with Harrington Events," I'd replied with professional pride. "We handle everything from corporate conferences to social gatherings." "How quaint," she'd responded with a thin smile. That was my introduction to the fact that Audrey Pierce had already been secured as the wedding planner, without any discussion with Ryan or consideration of my professional experience. Harold questioned my father about his teaching hobby, as though educating the next generation was a pastime rather than a career. Diana asked my mother which hospital she worked at. What Ryan had initially described as a nice celebration with family and friends transformed into a $300,000 extravaganza at the Boston Public Library, with a guest list approaching 300 people. When I expressed concern about the cost to Ryan, he assured me that the Brooks family was covering most expenses, though he was contributing a $50,000 non-refundable deposit from his startup equity that he'd recently cashed out. "It's an investment in our future," he said confidently. "Harold's connections alone could double my salary within a year." I watched my intelligent, independent brother slowly transform into someone who measured decisions against what would please his future in-laws. Still, his happiness seemed genuine, and Natalie continued to show him affection and support, at least when others were watching. I tried to silence my inner alarm bells, telling myself that perhaps I was just being overprotective. Little did I know that those alarm bells were trying to warn me of the devastation that lay ahead. The first official wedding planning meeting took place at Audrey Pierce's sleek office in Back Bay, a space that screamed exclusivity with its white marble surfaces, designer furniture, and strategically placed photos of Audrey with various celebrities whose weddings she had orchestrated. I arrived precisely on time, portfolio in hand, ready to offer my professional expertise where appropriate. Audrey herself was exactly what you'd expect from someone who charged more for a consultation than most people spend on their monthly rent. Impeccably styled in a cream Chanel suit, not a platinum blonde hair out of place, and wearing an expression that suggested she was perpetually smelling something slightly unpleasant. "You must be Ryan's sister," she said without standing when I entered the conference room where Natalie was already seated. "How helpful of you to join us." Natalie offered a brief smile that didn't reach her eyes. Melissa insisted on being involved, and since family is so important to Ryan, I was being positioned not as a professional in the field, but as a burdensome family member who needed to be placated. Nevertheless, I maintained my composure and took a seat at the massive glass table. I brought some portfolio examples and vendor contacts that might help streamline costs without sacrificing quality, I offered, sliding a professionally prepared folder across the table. Audrey glanced at it with the enthusiasm of someone being handed a flyer for carpet cleaning. "How thoughtful. We'll certainly keep these in mind for alternative options." The folder remained untouched for the remainder of the 2-hour meeting, during which Audrey presented concepts that seemed deliberately designed to exclude any input from the Carter family. The color scheme, venue layout, floral arrangements, menu selection, all were presented as decisions already made rather than options to be discussed. "We're focusing on creating an elevated experience," Audrey explained slowly, as though I might have trouble understanding. "Your budget-conscious suggestions might be more appropriate for a different type of celebration." This pattern continued over the following weeks. Every suggestion I made was dismissed. Every vendor I recommended was deemed insufficient, and every attempt to involve my parents in the planning was subtly redirected. Ryan, when I expressed my frustrations to him, just asked me to be patient. "Natalie's under a lot of pressure from her family," he explained after a particularly frustrating meeting. "This wedding is going to be covered in Boston Magazine." When the guest list was being finalized, I arrived at Natalie's condo for what I thought would be a collaborative session, only to discover that the Carter family had been allocated just 30 invitations, while the Brooks family had over 200. "This can't be right," I said, reviewing the spreadsheet Audrey had prepared. "What about Dad's brothers and their families? Mom's college friends who've known Ryan since he was born? My colleagues who've watched Ryan grow up through all my stories?" Natalie sighed, feeling my professional demeanor slipping. "Of course they are," Natalie replied with practiced patience. "That's why you have 30 spots instead of just immediate family. 30 invitations is actually generous considering most of these events only include immediate family from the less prominent side." "Less prominent side?" I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing from my brother's mouth. "Is that how you see us now? Your own family?" Ryan had the decency to look embarrassed. "That's not what I meant. Look, I'm trying to navigate a complicated situation. Could you please just try to be understanding? This wedding means everything to Natalie." As the weeks progressed, I began noticing another disturbing pattern. Costs that seemed deliberately inflated beyond even luxury wedding standards. The calligrapher Audrey insisted upon charged $15 per envelope. The custom napkins cost more than my monthly rent. The welcome bags for out-of-town guests, most of whom were Brooks invitees, included locally sourced gourmet items that totaled over $200 per bag. When I discreetly questioned some of these expenses during a planning meeting, suggesting equally elegant alternatives that wouldn't require a second mortgage, Natalie's response was immediate and cutting. "Melissa, I understand budgeting is part of your job with your smaller events," she said with false sweetness. But this isn't a corporate lunch or a budget wedding. Perhaps you should stay in your lane. I felt as though I'd been slapped. Ryan, who was present for this particular meeting, my parents trying their best to build bridges with their future in-laws, had dressed in their finest clothes and brought an expensive bottle of wine that I knew had stretched their budget. Harold Brooks barely looked at the bottle before handing it to his housekeeper. "We'll save this for cooking," he remarked with a thin smile. "I've opened a nice Bordeaux that I think even your palate might appreciate, Bill." My father, a man who had developed a modest knowledge of wines over decades of saving for special bottles, nodded politely despite the insult. Throughout dinner, the digs continued. Diana Brooks critiqued everything from my mother's hairstyle, so refreshing to see women of a certain age embracing natural gray, to my career choices. Event planning is a stepping stone to what? Exactly, dear. Each comment was delivered with such practiced pleasantness that objecting would have made us seem oversensitive. I noticed Ryan becoming increasingly tense, his eyes darting between his future in-laws and his family, clearly torn between worlds. When I tried to engage him in our usual banter, he responded with short, careful answers. I overheard Natalie and Audrey in the adjoining room, voices slightly raised after several glasses of wine. "Can you believe her suggestions for the centerpieces?" Natalie was saying with a laugh. "It's like she thinks we're having the reception at Olive Garden." "The brother clearly came from better genetic material than the rest of them," Audrey replied. "At least he cleans up well. The parents are hopeless and the sister, well, you're a saint for including her at all." I stood frozen, plates in hand, as they continued to mock my family. Later that night, I called my friend Allison Parker, one of the few people I felt I could confide in about the situation. "Am I overreacting?" I asked her after recounting the evening's events. "Mel." Increasingly, it seemed the answer was no. Or worse, perhaps he did see it but had decided the trade-off was worth it. 8 weeks before the wedding, I received my invitation just 3 days before the event. Clearly an afterthought. The invitation itself, a heavy cream cardstock with gold foil lettering, specified dressy attire, and directed guests to a registry at stores where the least expensive item was a $200 porcelain soap dish. The shower was held in the private dining room of Cristallo, all impeccably dressed in designer outfits that made my carefully selected dress from Nordstrom seem woefully inadequate. You must be the sister. Corporate team-building exercises and such. Before I could correct her assumption and explain my actual role coordinating substantial charity galas and executive conferences, another bridesmaid chimed in. "Ryan is such a find. So brilliant and driven. Natalie's been working wonders with him. Did you see him at the Andersons' dinner last month? We just mean he's adapting so well to Natalie's world." Throughout the 3-hour event, I was seated at a peripheral table with distant Brooks relatives while Natalie's close friends and immediate family occupied the central tables. Gift opening was an exercise in excess, each present more extravagant than the last, with Natalie's performative exclamations of delight growing more theatrical with each unwrapping. When she opened my gift, a handmade photo album I'd spent weeks creating, filled with childhood photos of Ryan and heartfelt notes from family members who had watched him grow up, her smile tightened. "How sentimental," she said, quickly setting it aside to reach for the next wrapped box, which contained a crystal decanter that elicited genuine enthusiasm. That evening, I tried calling Ryan to discuss how I'd been treated, but the call went to voicemail. His text response came hours later. "Sorry. Superficial exchanges." When we did speak, Ryan seemed distracted, often cutting conversations short with excuses about meetings or plans with Natalie. The brother who once told me everything was becoming a stranger. My parents, too, had begun expressing concerns about the wedding dynamics. Over Sunday dinner at their home, my mother finally voiced what we'd all been feeling. "I barely recognize Ryan anymore," she said quietly, pushing food around her plate. "Last week, I asked if he wanted me to make his favorite lasagna for a family dinner, and he said he's going keto, because Natalie thinks he needs to lose 10 pounds before the wedding." Dad shook his head. I offered to help with the rehearsal dinner, not even financially, just with planning, and Harold acted like I'd suggested hosting it in our basement, said he'd handle it and changed the subject. But the full extent of their disdain remained hidden until a chance workplace connection brought it to light. 2 days after the bridal shower, my coworker Katie approached my desk with an unusually serious expression. "Melissa, this might be nothing, but my roommate Sarah works as an assistant at Audrey Pierce's firm. She's been handling some of the paperwork for your brother's wedding." Katie hesitated. "She's heard and seen some things that she thought you should know about." That evening, I met Katie and Sarah at a quiet bar far from both our offices. Sarah, a nervous-looking woman in her mid-20s, glanced around before speaking. "I shouldn't be telling you this, I could lose my job, but it didn't feel right to stay silent," she began. Another email from Natalie included a spreadsheet categorizing guests as Class A and Class B, with all Carter family members and friends designated as Class B. Class B guests are being seated at the back tables, furthest from the head table, Sarah explained. The photography instructions specify minimal coverage of these tables. My hands shook as I scrolled through more evidence of the systematic effort to diminish my family's role in what should have been a joyous union of equals. But the most devastating revelation came in the form of an audio recording Sarah had captured during a planning meeting. "Ryan's family is necessary baggage," Natalie's voice stated clearly. "Once we're married, their role in our lives will naturally diminish. For now, we just need to manage them through the wedding with minimal disruption." Audrey's response was equally callous. "We've handled this type of situation before. The financial disparity between families often creates these challenges. Your contribution of the non-refundable deposit was brilliant. It gives them a stake without actual control." I felt physically ill listening to these women discuss my family, as though we were an inconvenience to be managed rather than loved ones to be embraced. The deposit, Ryan's $50,000 that he'd proudly contributed to their future, had apparently been nothing more than a strategic move to silence potential objections. "There's more," Sarah said quietly. "There's a contingency plan to exclude certain Carter guests, if higher priority Brooks connections accept last minute. And Audrey has done this before with other clients. She calls it family curation." The evidence was overwhelming and heartbreaking. I thanked Sarah for her courage in coming forward and spent the night wrestling with how or if to tell Ryan. Would he believe me over Natalie? Would showing him the evidence destroy his relationship? Or would he blame me as the messenger? Most painfully, did I even know who my brother was anymore? 5 weeks before the wedding, the final planning meeting for the rehearsal dinner became the catalyst for everything that followed. The meeting was scheduled at Le Méridien, the 5-star hotel where the dinner would take place. I arrived early, prepared with a few gentle suggestions based on Ryan's preferences, his favorite foods, music he enjoyed, perhaps a slideshow of childhood photos that would celebrate both families. Natalie arrived with Audrey and Harold Brooks in tow, all three engrossed in conversation that abruptly halted when they noticed me. Harold's expression of mild annoyance made it clear that my presence was unexpected and unwelcome. "Melissa," Natalie said with practiced politeness, "I didn't realize you'd be joining us today." "Ryan mentioned you were finalizing rehearsal dinner details," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Since it's traditionally a celebration hosted for the bride by the groom's family, I thought I might contribute some ideas that would make it special for both of you." Harold's laugh was short and dismissive. "My dear, that tradition is rather outdated. Given the scope of this wedding, we've decided I'll be handling the rehearsal dinner. We've already selected the menu and arranged appropriate entertainment." "Without any input from the Carter family?" I asked, struggling to maintain composure. "Your parents were consulted," Natalie interjected smoothly. "They agreed that given Harold's connections with the executive chef, it made sense for him to take the lead." This was a blatant lie. I had spoken with my parents just that morning, and they had mentioned feeling completely sidelined regarding the rehearsal dinner. But before I could challenge this claim, Ryan arrived, looking harried and apologetic. "Sorry I'm late," he said, kissing Natalie's cheek before briefly acknowledging the rest of us. "Got held up with a client call. Who once returned a wallet full of cash without taking a dollar. Instead, I saw someone carefully gauging the room, adjusting his expression to match the tenor set by the Brooks family." Throughout the meeting, I watched in growing disbelief as Ryan nodded along with every decision Harold announced. The menu featured none of Ryan's favorite foods. The schedule allowed no time for meaningful toasts from his oldest friends. When I tried to suggest incorporating elements that reflected Ryan's personality and history, Natalie smoothly interjected. "Darling, we want to create a cohesive experience for our guests. Too many personal elements might disrupt the sophisticated atmosphere we're cultivating." Ryan squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture I initially took as solidarity until I realized he was actually signaling me to stop pushing. The brother who had once trusted my judgment implicitly was now silently asking me to surrender his identity to Natalie's vision. After the meeting, I followed Natalie to the restroom, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her blouse before responding. "Melissa, I appreciate your concern, but Ryan understands the importance of this wedding for our future. Some sacrifices now will benefit both of us in the long run. These aren't just sacrifices of preference," I insisted. "This feels like his entire family is being systematically pushed aside. The sooner you accept your reduced role in his life, the easier this transition will be for everyone." The naked hostility in her eyes confirmed everything I'd suspected but tried to deny. Natalie's smile was cold. "He already has. Every time he's had to choose between your family's feelings and our plans, he's chosen us. That should tell you everything you need to know." I left the hotel in a daze, and that evening made the difficult decision to show Ryan what I'd learned from Sarah. I invited him to my apartment, prepared the evidence carefully, and tried to present it as gently as possible. "I'm not showing you this to hurt you," I explained as he stared at the emails and listened to the recording with growing disbelief. "But you deserve to know who you're really marrying." I expected shock, perhaps gratitude for the revelation, or at least thoughtful consideration. Instead, Ryan's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "You've never wanted me to be happy with Natalie," he said, his voice shaking. "From day one, you've been jealous of her family, their connections, the doors they're opening for me. Now you're manufacturing evidence and colluding with someone to steal private communications." "Ryan, listen to yourself," I pleaded. "That's Natalie's voice on the recording. Those are her mother's emails. This isn't something I created. These are their actual words about our family, taken out of context by someone who could lose her job," he shot back. "Did you even consider you might be ruining this person's career with your obsessive need to control my life?" The argument escalated as years of sibling dynamics collided with this immediate crisis. Ryan accused me of always treating him like a child who couldn't make his own decisions. I reminded him of all the times I'd supported his choices, even when I disagreed with them. He claimed I was sabotaging the most important relationship of his life, out of fear of losing my place in his world. "Maybe Natalie's right," he finally said, words that cut deeper than any others could have. "Maybe I do need to move on from always seeking your approval. I'm not a kid anymore, Melissa. This isn't about approval," I said, tears finally breaking through. "This is about watching someone I love being manipulated away from everything and everyone who truly cares about him." "I want you to back off," Ryan said, gathering his coat. "If you can't support my marriage to Natalie, then maybe you shouldn't be part of the wedding at all." He left without another word, the door closing with a terrible finality behind him. I called my parents, who tried to mediate but felt as powerless as I did. Dad suggested giving Ryan space to come to his senses, while Mom worried that confronting the situation directly had only pushed him further into Natalie's camp. For 2 agonizing days, I heard nothing from Ryan. Then on the 3rd day, my phone rang with Audrey Pierce's name on the caller ID. "Melissa." Her crisp voice began without preamble. "I'm calling to inform you that after careful consideration, the Brooks family has decided to cancel your family's invitations to the wedding." I nearly dropped the phone. "What are you talking about? You can't uninvite the groom's entire family. Given the recent tensions and your apparent inability to support this union appropriately, Natalie and her parents feel this is the best solution for everyone involved. Ryan has been consulted and understands this decision." "This is insane," I said, my voice rising. "And what about the $50,000 non-refundable deposit that Ryan paid? I assume that will be returned since you're excluding his family." Audrey's laugh was short and cold. "The contract clearly states that the deposit is non-refundable under any circumstances. Section 12, Paragraph 3. If you'd like to review it. The deposit secured the date and initial services, which have been provided. You can't possibly think this is legal or ethical, I argued. You're taking my brother's money and then banning his family from the event it was meant to secure. Your concerns have been noted, Audrey replied with practiced indifference. If you wish to pursue this matter further, our legal team will be happy to respond. Otherwise, consider this matter closed. After ending the call, I immediately tried to reach Ryan, only to discover he had blocked my number. My parents reported the same when they tried to contact him. In a final desperate attempt, I went to his apartment, but the building security refused to let me up, saying they had specific instructions regarding Miss Carter. I finally managed to speak with Ryan a day later, using Allison's phone to call him. His voice was distant, formal, as though speaking to a stranger. Ryan, please tell me you didn't agree to this, I begged. You left me no choice, Melissa, he replied. Your jealousy and interference have made it impossible for Natalie to feel comfortable with your presence at our wedding. This isn't about me. They've uninvited Mom and Dad too. Your entire family. His silence spoke volumes before he finally responded. Maybe if you hadn't tried to sabotage my relationship, things would be different. I need people who support me in my life right now, not people trying to control me. Ryan, they're keeping your $50,000. How can you not see what's happening? It's just money, he said flatly. A small price to pay for peace on the most important day of our lives. The call ended with no resolution, just a devastating awareness that I had indeed lost my brother, not to Natalie, but to the person he had chosen to become in order to be worthy of her world. The initial shock and grief left me paralyzed for nearly 48 hours. I alternated between tears, rage. The financial aspect added insult to injury. My parents had been saving for years to contribute to the rehearsal dinner, setting aside small amounts from each paycheck. Dad had even taken on tutoring jobs after school to add to their Ryan's wedding fund. The $50,000 that Ryan had lost, more money than my parents had in their entire retirement account, seemed to symbolize how thoroughly the Brooks family had claimed him. 3 days after Audrey's call, let them take Ryan's money, exclude us from his wedding, and essentially steal him from our family? Dad sighed heavily. What choice do we have, Melissa? We can't force our way into the wedding. Ryan's an adult making his own decisions, however misguided. But this goes beyond bad decisions, I insisted. There's something fundamentally wrong with a contract that allows them to keep $50,000 while excluding the very family that money was meant to include in the celebration. Mom reached across the table to squeeze my hand. What are you suggesting? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I think we should at least understand our options. The next day, I called my friend Jennifer Harris, a lawyer specializing in contract law. She agreed to review the wedding planning contract over lunch. This is troubling, she said, frowning as she read through the document Ryan had signed. There are several clauses here that might not hold up under scrutiny. The contract creates an implied covenant that the deposit secures certain rights, including the right of the groom's immediate family to attend. By accepting the deposit and then excluding the family without evidence of actual disruption, they've potentially breached the contract's implied terms. This conversation sparked the first flicker of hope I'd felt in days. That evening, I met with Jennifer and Allison to develop a strategy. We needed more evidence. More documentation of the pattern of behavior that had led to this point. We should reach out to Sarah again, Allison suggested. If Audrey has done this before, there might be a paper trail. Sarah, though terrified of losing her job, agreed to meet us after hours at a coffee shop far from Audrey's office. She brought additional documents, emails, planning notes, and even recordings of conversations that painted a damning picture. Audrey calls it family curation, Sarah explained, her voice low. It's a service she offers to wealthy clients who want to minimize the presence of less desirable family members. Usually, it's just about seating arrangements and photo opportunities, but sometimes, like in your case, it escalates to complete exclusion. The documentation revealed 3 previous weddings where similar situations had occurred, families who had contributed financially only to be marginalized or excluded when they raised concerns about their treatment. Has anyone ever challenged her on this? I asked. Sarah nodded. Once. A father of a groom threatened legal action after being told he couldn't give a toast at his son's wedding despite contributing $30,000. Even the maitre d' at the restaurant where Natalie had revealed her true feelings about Ryan's family. Our research also uncovered disturbing patterns in Audrey's business practices, inflated charges, kickbacks from vendors, and what amounted to a social gatekeeping service for elite Boston families wanting to manage relationships with those they considered beneath them. 2 weeks after being uninvited from my brother's wedding, I walked into Audrey Pierce's office without an appointment, Jennifer at my side. The receptionist tried to stop us. What followed was a carefully orchestrated confrontation where we laid out exactly what we knew: the pattern of exclusionary practices, the questionable contract clauses, the previous settlement to avoid publicity. As Jennifer outlined potential legal challenges, and the damage a public lawsuit could do to Audrey's carefully cultivated image, Audrey's composure began to crack. What exactly do you want? She finally asked, her voice tight. Full refund of Ryan's deposit, reinstatement of all Carter family invitations with appropriate seating and inclusion, and a written apology, I stated firmly. Otherwise, we move forward with legal action and contact Grace Montgomery at the Boston Globe, who's already expressed interest in a story about predatory wedding planning practices targeting families of different socioeconomic backgrounds. Grace, a society columnist with whom I'd connected through my event planning network, had indeed been intrigued by the situation, recognizing the broader implications beyond our specific case. This is extortion, Audrey said weakly. This is accountability, I corrected. You have 24 hours to discuss with the Brooks family and respond. Jennifer delivered a detailed legal letter to both Audrey and the Brooks family that afternoon, outlining the potential claims and evidence. The response came not from Audrey but from Harold Brooks himself, requesting a private meeting at his office the following day. I arrived with Jennifer, refusing to be intimidated by the opulent surroundings of Brooks Investment Group, or the man who sat behind a desk larger than my first apartment. This situation has gotten out of hand, Harold began, his tone suggesting we were being unreasonable. While I understand your disappointment at not attending the wedding, let me stop you there, I interrupted, channeling a confidence I didn't entirely feel. This isn't about disappointment. This is about a systematic effort to exclude my family after taking my brother's money, and about the manipulative isolation of Ryan from people who truly care about his well-being. Harold's expression hardened. Young lady, you need to understand who you're dealing with. My family's connections in this city are precisely why this story would make such compelling news, Jennifer interjected smoothly. Their perfect social image concealed some concerning business practices that wouldn't withstand journalistic scrutiny, and Harold's upcoming consideration for a prestigious board position would certainly be jeopardized by negative press. The meeting ended with Harold agreeing to consider our requests, his face flushed with barely contained anger. Less than 4 hours later, Diana Brooks called my mother, the first direct contact in weeks. There seems to have been a misunderstanding, Diana said stiffly. Of course your family should attend the wedding. We've instructed Audrey to reinstate all invitations immediately. When my mother pressed about the deposit, Diana hesitated before conceding that point as well. Harold has authorized a full refund. We trust this resolves the matter to everyone's satisfaction. What they hadn't counted on was that our actions would reach Ryan. A groomsman who had witnessed the increasingly troubling dynamic shared our legal letter with him, concerned about his friend's well-being. This, combined with the Brooks family's sudden capitulation, finally penetrated the fog Ryan had been living in. Later that evening my doorbell rang. When I opened it, Ryan stood there, looking more like himself than he had in months, though his eyes were red-rimmed and his shoulders slumped with the weight of terrible realizations. I've been so blind, he said simply. Ryan's awakening didn't happen all at once. The full truth emerged gradually as Ryan started noticing patterns he'd previously ignored or excused. Natalie's controlling behavior, her parents' condescension, the subtle ways they had isolated him from his support system. I need to see what you showed me before, he said that night in my apartment. his voice steadier than it had been during our previous confrontation. "I'm ready to really listen." We spent hours going through everything: the emails, the recordings, the documentation of Audrey's family curation practices. Ryan listened in silence, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly absorbing the overwhelming evidence of manipulation. "I don't even recognize myself these past few months," he finally said, rubbing his hands over his face. "How did I let this happen? How did I turn against my own family?" "It happened slowly," I said gently. "That's how these things work. Small compromises that gradually become bigger ones until you're standing somewhere you never thought you'd be." The next morning, Ryan confronted Natalie at her condo. I wasn't present for this conversation, but he called me immediately afterward, his voice shaking. "It's over," he said simply. When I asked her directly about the emails and recordings, she didn't even deny it. She just said her parents were trying to protect me from limiting influences and that someday I'd understand it was for the best. The wedding was officially postponed 2 days later and canceled entirely within a week. The Brooks family, eager to avoid the scandal we'd threatened, not only returned Ryan's $50,000 deposit, but added a substantial settlement in exchange for signed non-disclosure agreements. Jennifer ensured the language protected our right to discuss our experiences without naming specific individuals, allowing us to maintain our dignity without granting them complete silence. The aftermath was both painful and healing. Ryan moved temporarily into our parents' house, needing the comfort of home as he processed what had happened. He described feeling like he was waking from a trance, horrified at how completely he had abandoned his values and the people who truly loved him. "I thought I was trading up," he admitted during a particularly difficult conversation with our parents. "Not just financially, but entering a world where everything seemed more significant, more important than the life we had. I didn't realize I was actually trading down in all the ways that matter." Our reconciliation as siblings didn't happen overnight. The wounds were too deep, the betrayal too profound for instant forgiveness. We began with small steps: coffee once a week, occasional text messages, rebuilding the trust that had been fractured. "I said unforgivable things to you," Ryan acknowledged during one of these meetings, unable to meet my eyes. "You were trying to protect me, and I accused you of jealousy and sabotage." "They were experts at manipulation," I reminded him. "They isolated you and rewrote your narrative until you couldn't recognize what was happening." At my suggestion, Ryan started seeing a therapist who specialized in helping people recover from manipulative relationships. Our parents joined him for some sessions, and eventually I did too. These family therapy appointments became sacred space for honest conversation about not just the wedding disaster but older patterns and dynamics that had made Ryan vulnerable to Natalie's influence. 6 months after the wedding that never was, signs of the brother I'd known all my life began consistently re-emerging. His sense of humor returned, first self-deprecating jokes about his brief career as a social climber, then his genuine compassion, volunteering again at the youth center where he'd mentored kids before meeting Natalie. His confidence returned more slowly, rebuilt on a foundation of authentic values rather than external validation. In a development that surprised no one more than Ryan himself, he started dating Allison, my friend who had supported us through the wedding drama, after running into her at my birthday celebration. Their relationship progressed cautiously, with Ryan hyper-aware of his past mistakes. "She likes me for who I actually am," he told me with wonder after their 5th date. "She asked about my favorite hole-in-the-wall restaurants and laughed at my terrible sci-fi movie collection instead of suggesting upgrades." My own career took an unexpected turn when the experience inspired me to specialize in authentic celebration planning, helping clients create meaningful events that reflected their true values rather than social expectations. The promotion I received after successfully handling a particularly demanding client, whose difficulties paled in comparison to Audrey Pierce, came with a significant raise and greater creative control. The repercussions extended beyond our family. Audrey Pierce's business suffered as whispers of her family curation practices spread through Boston's social circles. Not everyone objected. Some clients apparently appreciated this service, but enough people were disturbed by the ethical implications that her once untouchable status diminished considerably. The Brooks family faced their own subtle social consequences. Nothing as dramatic as complete ostracism, but the indefinite postponement and subsequent cancellation of what had been heralded as the wedding of the season raised questions they couldn't comfortably answer. Several of Harold's business associates who had witnessed his treatment of the Carter family distanced themselves, and Diana's influence on certain cultural boards noticeably waned. As for Natalie, Ryan heard through mutual connections that she became engaged again barely 4 months after their breakup, this time to the son of a prominent political family, a match that apparently met with her parents' complete approval. Our family's recovery continued through small, meaningful moments. Sunday dinners that Ryan never missed, no matter how busy work became. Dad and Ryan restoring a vintage car together, a project they'd discussed for years but never started. Mom teaching Ryan her secret family recipes that Natalie had dismissed as too simple for their entertaining needs. I established necessary boundaries with Ryan, making it clear that while I forgave him, rebuilding our relationship required his consistent effort and respect. This wasn't punishment but protection for both of us. I understand, he said when I explained this. Trust isn't an entitlement. It's something I need to re-earn. 1 year after the wedding debacle, we gathered for a family dinner to celebrate Dad's birthday. As we sat around the table that had witnessed countless Carter family moments, holidays, homework sessions, heated Monopoly games, tearful confessions, and raucous laughter, I looked at my brother and recognized him completely for the first time in nearly 2 years. I propose a toast, Ryan said, raising his glass, to the richest family I know, not in money but in the things that actually matter. To integrity that can't be bought, love that doesn't come with conditions, and the wisdom to know the difference. As we clinked glasses, I felt the final pieces of our fractured family click back into place, not in their original configuration, but in a new arrangement strengthened by what we'd endured together. The experience had changed us all, making us more discerning about the values we prioritized and the people we welcomed into our lives. Money, we had learned in the most painful way possible, couldn't buy class or character. True wealth lay in relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care. A lesson worth far more than $50,000. So what about you? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to separate you from the people who truly care about you? Or witnessed a friend or family member being manipulated away from their support system? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It helps more people find these stories of family loyalty and standing up for what's right. Remember, sometimes the most valuable thing you can do for someone you love is to be the voice they need to hear, even when it's not the voice they want to hear. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.